Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and welcome to another episode of Rare Variants. In this series, I tend to take a lot of our most famous game consoles that had some sort of oddball version, and just go ahead and talk about them, give their history and their story and all that sort of fun stuff. Now, I've done this a lot. There's a big playlist of things, including the ill-fated Nintendo PlayStation prototype, and even Sega's own Sega Pluto prototype. But then there's, things that were also officially released as well. And one of those things, the one we're going to be covering today, is the ill-fated, well, sort of ill-fated, because it did come out, but it just didn't last very long, is the Sega Genesis CDX, commonly referred to as the Sega CDX. This bad boy right here. Now, often what happens when I've seen people talk about this, and they typically give kind of the same input on it, which is really, yo man, it's a Sega Genesis and a Sega CD, but it's like tinier and stuff. Anyway, like and subscribe. What are you doing? Let's talk about, why does it exist? Let's get into that. Let's not just review it as a piece of technology. Let's talk about the history. It didn't just materialize out of nothing and vanish for no reason. It has a story. So I've actually done my best to kind of research this. I even reached out to some people over at Sega, and I was like, yo, can you give me some of this information? And a lot of them are just like, I'd love to, but some of that information is sealed and this, and we have to unearth it, and we'll help you out later. Sega's, I love the direction that Sega's going as of late. But anyway, so I thought it would be awesome to go ahead and sit down and talk about this. So let's start at the beginning of the story of the Genesis CDX. Now, it's important to remember that this came out in 1994, which to Sega might have been their most insane year ever. I mean, that is to Sega what 1955 is to Back to the Future. It's like the temporal junction point where just everything has to happen for some reason. So, and what I mean by that is, you have to remember in 94, it was the transition phase. We were going from basically the end of the fourth generation, aka, the Sega Genesis and Sega Mega Drive versus the Super Nintendo, into the next generation, which would ultimately be like the Sega Saturn, the PlayStation, the N64, that era. 94 was kind of when everybody was trying to figure out what they were going to do. And Sega was possibly the craziest about how they went about doing this. I want to put this out there. In 1994, Sega had a lot of different hardware come out. One of those things you could kind of argue was the JVC XI, which was another version of a Sega Genesis and a Sega CD all built into one unit, though technically JVC released that, and technically Sega's version of that had come out 2 years prior in Japan as the Wonder Mega. But yes, the JVC XI was released in the United States in 1994. However, that aside, the other hardware that Sega put out that year, ultimately, would be the Sega Pico, their attempt at a child-friendly home console. That came out in 1994, along with the 32X, which we've got, 3 of them sitting here. 2. This is now the 64X. That's totally how that works. That's just math. Come on, do the math. That's what Atari taught us. Anyway, so this came out in 1994, specifically at the very end of 94. And on top of that, in Japan, the Sega Saturn came out in 94. Crazy year, right? Well, the one that people tend to forget, I guess aside from the Pico, is the Sega Genesis CDX came out in 94. Now, information on this particular device is oddly scarce to the point where all I could find out was that it did come out in 94. Again, I approached people at Sega being like, what part of the year? And they were like, they weren't 100% certain because they have to unearth that information, but it was essentially pretty sure it was the summer. And it was definitely before the 32X, because it got discontinued before the 32X came out. If you look here, though, I can offer you some circumstantial evidence. I have 2 of the units, obviously. So one was produced in January of 1994, while the other one was produced in May of 1994. So that doesn't mean it came out in January. In fact, I know I have Dreamcasts that were made 3 months before the release. So it just means that at least for that 5 months they were in production, but how many they made and exactly when they released them, don't know. So it's okay, we'll go with that. So roughly the summer of 1994, Sega releases the Sega Genesis CDX. Now, here's a few things you need to understand about the motivation behind this. One, I don't know this, but I'm fairly certain it was because Sega had so many different hardware teams with different particular motivations that this thing ever even got released. In their case, the goal seemed to be, okay, we're at that phase in a console's lifespan where it's about to go out, so we need to release a cheaper model of it to kind of introduce it to a bunch of people who missed out on it the whole time. This is not an unheard of thing. Sega did this themselves, Nintendo has done this, Atari has done this, Sony and Microsoft have done this. It just happens. It's a common practice. What Sega did, though, that was kind of different was, rather than just making a cheap Genesis and throwing it out there, they also decided to include a Sega CD. Now, you have to remember, at that point in time, you basically had this, well, minus the 32X, of course, well, both 32Xs. You had the Genesis Model 1 and the Sega CD Model 1. You also had the Genesis Model 2 and the Sega CD Model 2. Regardless of which combination you went for, it was going to cost you a pretty penny to get all that stuff. So the idea was, let's combine all of it together, minus the 32X because it didn't exist yet, and just give you a cheaper bundle. And ultimately you did. For $399, you got all of that. But that was still kind of a tough pill to swallow. So on top of that, they're like, we'll give it additional functionality. What's very unique about this particular device is that it also, part of the reason its shape is like this and why it has these face buttons and everything, is this is also a portable CD player. It even has a battery slot right back there that takes 2 AA batteries. Now, I can't imagine too many people bought this thing and decided to actually use it for that purpose, but we'll get back around to that later. But on the front, you know, it does have the disc, you know, eject mechanism. It's got the skip track function, start and pause, stop, reset, the power button, obviously. And basically, depending on, you know, if you had it connected to a TV or not, when you turned it on, it would decide, is this a game or is it a CD or what have you. And one of the coolest things about it, actually, was that because the technology that was in the Sega CD, the way the games worked is they were like a single file of data, and then after that file was just a series of files of music. Most of the time, that's how Sega CD games were encoded. So if you took one of those games and put it into a normal CD player, for example, it wouldn't know what to do with the first section. It would skip that and just let you play the music from the game. So Sonic CD, for example, which you can see right there, was very infamous for that. Again, the game was just part of the beginning, and then you had music. So if you owned Sonic CD and you owned this, then you could just put in Sonic CD, put in your headphones, and actually listen to the music for the game, then get home, connect it to a television, and now start playing Sonic CD. So it was a pretty neat idea. So it retailed at $399, and it came with this bundle pack. Now, this bundle pack was just kind of them being like, let's just throw everything at this that people are going to want. Had this cool little ribbon thing for Genesis CDX. And then it came with Sonic CD, which by far was the most like highly sought after and I think most well-known Sega CD game. And as I said, you know, if you had this and you had Sonic CD, you could listen to the music. Well, you had it because it came with it. It also came with one of the better-known Genesis games, a version of Echo the Dolphin made for the Sega CD. So same basic idea. It was the Genesis game with extra better music and all that. But they also made a compilation of Genesis games on the Sega CD. So this included Streets of Rage, Revenge of Shinobi, Columns, Golden Axe, and Super Monaco GP. And of course, it all came with instruction manuals. So you got a lot of games right at the beginning, and it was kind of a good way to catch up on what, you know, Sega had been offering. If you had perhaps been with Nintendo that whole time, or, you know, whatever you were doing, you now had the chance to get all these great Sega games and all this hardware for a relatively bundled price. So what happened? Well, as the year progressed, it was obvious. I mean, you just kind of look back at it, and it's kind of obvious they clearly had a change in direction. They also had a change in probably PR and marketing teams and all that. And they just kind of axed the Genesis CDX very quickly. It's commonly referred to as the Sega CDX, though technically the name is Genesis CDX. I made the mistake a million times. But they basically discontinued it, and in North America anyway, they really started to focus on the 32X. So one of the common misconceptions is this thing would be great if it had a Sega CD, or sorry, a 32X built into it. I mean, it's got the X in the name. Why doesn't it have it? It's because it existed well before it, and they were made by totally different teams. It was never going to be the case that it would have a 32X built into it. However, the 32X would ultimately come, and that would be kind of the direction that Sega would focus on for a while. So what's really funny about this is that when the 32X was coming out, they essentially discontinued this here. Supposedly, they only sold 5,000 units of this in North America, though I don't necessarily believe that, because I've seen these things a million times at conventions. I've seen them online all the time. They don't seem that rare. They're just kind of expensive. Which is ironic because, again, it was created to be the cheap solution, so you didn't have to buy all this stuff, and over time it was so sought after it became more valuable than all the other pieces. It's the way the cookie crumbles, as they say. But so the 32X is, you know, is coming up, and they discontinue it here, and they ultimately did still release it mostly in Europe in 1995, although it was kind of a scattered release throughout parts of Asia. It did technically come out in Japan, but it's almost unheard of to find the Japanese version, which is a little ironic, I think. But yes, in those parts of the world, it was known as the Multi-Mega because of the nature of the console. We call it the Mega Drive and the Mega CD. It was now the Multi-Mega because it could do multiple mega things. Whatever. Anyway, so the 32X comes out, and it's very interesting you can tell, just looking at the box of the 32X, like Sega was in a multiple mindsets and didn't really know what direction to go with. So if you look at the box, the cover of the 32X, there is actually a sticker plastered on it that says it works with all versions of the Genesis, which is not actually true, by the way. But it also very specifically says it does not work with the Genesis CDX. Now that's kind of funny, because like I said, there are versions it actually doesn't work with, but in this case, it totally does. It does work with the Sega CDX, Genesis CDX. Now, the reason they did this was, well, look, you can connect it physically. And as long as you have the cables, which you would because they were included, and you would have the power supply, which was included, it would function. The problem is it doesn't make for a very secure connection. And so it was likely what happened was Sega was like, I don't really want to deal with that, and ultimately I think that we'll just say it doesn't work. But you can tell they were of two mindsets, because if you look at the 32X manual, it actually has a page describing the process of connecting the 32X to the Genesis CDX. And what it has in there, interestingly, is a little piece of plastic that you would stick in between the two devices that would have made it for a more secure connection. However, Sega ultimately decided never to release this piece of plastic, probably because they basically abandoned the CDX anyway. So it's like, how many of those could you realistically sell? It probably really wasn't worth their time. So it was just easier to say that it's not supported. But I want to point out here that fans have since dealt with this problem. There are actually 3D printed versions of that you can get now. In fact, a guy named Tristan just sent me one. He made an entirely new one. This is actually the prototype right here on my other CDX 32X combo. This is great, actually. This one is like much more secure than the one that was already out there. It's a prototype, so it doesn't. There's still certain parts he asked me to kind of give him notes on so he can refine it a little bit, because he doesn't even own a CDX. I mean, talk about passion, making a device for a console he doesn't even have. But yeah, so he made this, and one of the coolest things about it is there's a screw point on the back that he created that actually fits right into the back of the Sega CDX. I don't entirely know why Sega did this, but on the back of the CDX there is actually a little screw mounting port. And you might think, oh, it was totally for this. But based on the artwork of the 32X design, that wasn't the case. And again, when they made this, they didn't know the 32X was going to be a thing. So why it's there, I'm not totally sure. But it is useful in this context. So that makes for a very secure connection. So now, no such issues. It's stable. And the reason stability is important is, again, if you're using the console with like very limited contact, it would work. But with the stability there, you have better ability to swap discs if you ever need to, or just honestly, just to not risk having damage anything or causing a game to freeze or what have you. This is the type of thing that, is just kind of required just for it to be stable. Plus, honestly, aesthetically speaking, how cool does that look now? I really like that. So anyway, thank you very much to Tristan. Actually, I'll put a link in the description if you're interested in the mount for any reason. I'll put that there. You can contact him and perhaps get yourself one. But anyway, so the Sega CDX pretty much was abandoned, like right then and there, like within the same year that it came out. And it has kind of gone on to just be this like novelty version of the Genesis and the CDX that at least for years people were like super into, because they were like, I love the idea, I love the design, I like how compact and sleek it is, I like the additional functionality, even though it's kind of, the portable CD aspect, even though it's kind of useless. And it makes for such a nicer, smaller Genesis. I think that's great. So a lot of people really sought these out. The irony is, I personally never really did. I always kind of liked the original, bigger, bulkier designs, because yes, it was convenient to have only one power supply for this thing. However, over time, that too has been addressed. Fans have made third-party alternatives. So, like, I actually have a cable. I even did a video on it years ago, where you can power all three of these at the same time with one cable, which is great. But I never needed it to be this small little design. The other thing that I never really liked about it compared to other versions of the Genesis is, like, every version of the Genesis supports RGB outputs. You get this beautiful, clean, clear picture. And the CDX does, but it's like the weirdest one. It's very wonky. So when you connect it to a modern television, typically, you need some sort of mediator, like a FrameMeister or a RetroTink, OSSC, whatever. And I've noticed that with the CDX, sometimes it works correctly and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the picture is just kind of distorted. And it does it on both of them, so I'm just like... In some devices it does, whereas I'm like, every version of the Model 1 Genesis is always going to work, so whatever. But regardless, it's still a very cool device. Now, let me tell you how I even got one, because it must look insane that I have two of these things if there's only supposedly 5,000, which again, I don't know if I really believe that, just because, like I said, you can find them easily, and, like the Jaguar CD supposedly released 10,000 units, and I never see those. Like, I have one, and I've seen, maybe one or two ever at a convention, and if you go online, you can see, like, one or two of the same that are just sitting up on eBay. I know one other person that has one. Whereas the CDX, like, any day of the week, go on eBay, there's a bunch of them up there. I see them at conventions all the time. So the idea that it's sold half as many units, yet is vastly more available, I don't know. The only argument in favor there is just that the CDX was vastly more reliable than the Jaguar CD, and frankly, probably more sought after. But regardless, how I got one. So there's a funny time, like around when I was in high school, like around 2003-ish, Sega was no longer making consoles, right? And I just went through this phase where I kind of wanted to go back and get all the Sega stuff I had missed out on, because I really just had a Genesis and a Dreamcast. But at the time, believe it or not, I was super into Transformers, which I still kind of represent here, and there's the nice harmonious marriage there of Mega Drive, Megatron. But I was super into Transformers figures at that point, and I even went to Transformers conventions. And one of the things is, at these conventions, they would have like exclusive figures just available there, and so I would pick up a couple, because when you're at the convention, it was relatively cheap to do so, and I knew that they would have increasing value. So I held on to them. And at one point, I found this guy on a Transformers forum who really wanted one of the figures I had. And he basically said, like, I'll trade you something. I was like, all right. So I asked him, like, what figures do you have? We were, like, doing that whole thing. And he didn't have anything I wanted. And eventually he just shows me this photo of, like, he's like, I don't know if you like old video games or whatever, but I've got all this, like, Sega stuff. And he showed me, like, boxes and boxes and boxes of stuff. And it was all, like, Genesis era stuff, Saturn stuff. There was a Nomad in there. There's 32Xs. I mean, there's tons of stuff. And I was just like, what's funny is, at the time I was kind of like, I mean, fine, like whatever. Like, it's like I have a couple of these figures. It's okay, we'll do the trade. Like, I didn't even think I was winning on that deal, because at the time, you have to understand, this stuff was worthless. Nobody wanted it. I mean, he was essentially, in his estimation, he was like sending me his garbage. You know what I mean? It was just kind of funny. So I get all this stuff, and I was like, okay, cool. One of the things in there is a Sega CDX. And I'm like, this is neat. Never seen this before. Whatever. I don't think too much about it, right? And, like, that's how I got one. It's really kind of funny. And, what's even funnier is, like, eventually I would get the second one, which was also accidental. Around the time I was in college, a very similar situation occurred. In fact, if you go back to the earliest days of my channel, there's a video up where I had bought this box of various Sega hardware for like $40. The CDX was not part of that, but around that time I was just in this mood of like amassing various consoles for the cheap, because people were just purging them around then. So I found this listing online that people kept sharing in like Facebook groups and stuff like that, being like, this guy's got tons of stuff. A friend of mine had actually sent me the link, and this dude was just like releasing like everything he had, which was tons of Genesis, tons of Sega CD, tons of 32X, tons of different consoles. But his issue was he was not willing to ship any of it. He was like, it's local pickup only. And so as a result, like nobody was bidding on it. Do you know where he was? In the Chicago suburbs. Where do I live? Chicago. So I was like, oh, wow, I could win this. So I actually put in a lowball bid thinking there was no chance I would win it. Nobody outbid me. I ended up winning this big thing of stuff. I actually had to take like 2 car rides out to this guy's house and just load my car up with his stuff. And it turns out what was happening is that his wife was making him purge everything, and that was just going to be the end of it. So he was kind of not happy to be doing this, so I feel for him. But he also had this giant Saturn collection that he had managed to keep because his wife, was like, he talked her into letting it. Anyway, it doesn't matter. CDX was in there, and that's how I got the second one. They both work great, no problems whatsoever. Kind of funny that, and one other thing before we go here. I want to admit up front, right here, right now, that I actually did try to use the Genesis CDX for its quote-unquote portable CD abilities. In 2004, I remember this. It was a year after I got this. My mom took my sister and me to Mexico for some reason. And I just don't remember why. But we went down there. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to take the portable Genesis CD player, and I'm going to listen to music, and it's going to be awesome. Even though at that point, like, MP3 players were already a thing, so it was already ridiculous. So I got like a CD jacket, and I actually put games like Sonic CD in there, but I also put in like music CDs that I had, and I was just like, cool, this is what I'm going to do. So I'm all pumped about it. Yes, whatever. This is what I could have done, 10 years prior when the thing came out. I wanted to, try it, right? And so I get in the car, and I'm like listening to music, and we're taking the ride to the airport. We get through the airport, clear security, all that sort of stuff. Finally get on board the plane. I'm sitting there. I've been listening to music like this whole time, other than, security when you have to take it off or whatever. And I get on the plane. We haven't even taken off yet, and it just dies. And the reason it dies is it totally just ran out of power. Is no joke that these things did not last on battery power for very long. And no, you could not play a game off of the batteries. However, it was not totally useless. I did have extra batteries, so it's not like I couldn't try it from time to time, but it was hilarious like how short the lifespan was. And of course, when I got to Mexico, I had the intended function of being able to be like, oh cool, now I can plug it in the TV and play the games I brought. So I had my fun. But so at least one person out there did actually try this as a portable CD player, even if it was essentially useless, and 10 years later. But there you go. So in short, that is kind of the history of the CDX. It's a bizarre little oddity in Sega's history. I really think what happened is it was just one team thought we can squeeze some more life out of this era, and then it didn't quite pan out the way they wanted, and a different team was like, we don't really need that, and it just kind of vanished very quickly. If you're able to get one, it's a cool little novelty, though it's not really how I personally would go about playing Genesis stuff. But if you do, I gotta tell you, the mount, really nice if you have a 32X. Like, it wasn't until I finally saw it all connected like this where I'm just like, this is a sick design. This is like, there's some 80s talk, but this is a pretty nice design. Like, this looks pretty good. So yeah, and he's gonna send me. He's doing an updated version that he's gonna send me later. So I'm looking forward to seeing what that ultimately turns out like. But I mean, honestly, very, very nice. So there you go. I want to thank, of course, Tristan for hooking me up with that. I also want to thank the people at Sega for trying to give me some information on this. I want to thank you guys for watching. If you could like, comment, subscribe, I appreciate that. Check the social media stuff in the description. I have a merch mart now. You can buy random shirts of me and stuff like that if you want. And you can always follow me on Discord. Or you can go into the Discord. It's free. You can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. You can join up the Patreon, or you hit the join button here. Any of that sort of stuff, always appreciate it. Thank you very much, and I'll see you all later.